Happy New Year, everybody. New year, new setup, and now I want to take this first month of the new year to talk about some of the Batman movies that I just haven't talked about yet. And starting off, I'm going to talk about the Christopher Nolan Batman movie that I don't think is anybody's favorite. The Dark Knight Rises. Now, The Dark Knight Rises is the third in the Christopher Nolan Dark Knight trilogy. It came out in 2012, and this was really when superhero movies were popping off. You had the Avengers coming out the same year, you had the Amazing Spider-Man coming out the same year. So the hype was real, especially coming off of the heels of The Dark Knight, which is arguably the best Batman or even superhero movie ever made. And The Dark Knight Rises is good, but it's not great. There's a lot of things that could be better about it, particularly in the script. But everything else is actually pretty impressive. Just like you saw with Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, Christopher Nolan brings a more grounded storytelling approach to Batman. And the supporting cast is really the best thing about this movie. There are so many supporting characters here that all get moments to shine. You have Batman, of course, played by Christian Bale. He's great, as always, although his performance seems a little off in this movie, just a little bit. He's still the Christian Bale Batman that we've come to know, and even though his voice is even more goofy in this version, it's still everything that you probably expect going in, except that his mannerisms in the vocal department just seem like he's letting his Welsh accent slip through just a little bit more than normal. Usually he's pretty good about keeping his accent consistent, but in this movie there were a couple times where I'm like, you sound weirdly English for an American Bruce Wayne. It just doesn't quite sound right, like he's got kind of a speech impediment or something. But everybody else is just as good as you remember. Alfred Pennyworth is back, Lucius Fox is back, Gary Oldman's Commissioner Gordon is back, and they're all fine. They're doing what they've done in previous movies, working with Batman behind the scenes. It's all good. But this movie also has a bunch of new characters that it introduces, like Joseph Gordon-Levitt as Officer Blake. And even though the reveal of him as Robin is so clunky and awkward, they just picked the laziest route they could have gone with revealing that, yeah, he's supposed to be Robin. But Officer Blake as his own character, this cop that's helping Batman, that believes in Batman, that really has that optimism, and all the other characters are pretty jaded at this point, so we need those fresh eyes to get us back into this world of the Batman. He does a great job, and he actually does what a Robin should do in a Batman movie. He's the fresh eyes, he's that youthful energy that helps to balance out the jadedness of some of the other characters. He fills his role perfectly. And then we also have Selina Kyle in this movie, played by Anne Hathaway, and she is one of the better Catwomen that I've seen in movies. Catwoman usually isn't portrayed that well, at least until Zoe Kravitz in The Batman. I feel like she is the most comic accurate Catwoman that we've gotten. But Anne Hathaway is right there next to her in that cat burglar take on Catwoman that I personally love. I don't really love the whole cat freak of nature thing that was made popular with the Michelle Pfeiffer take and then with the Halle Berry disaster. I really do appreciate them bringing it back to the roots of the character in this one, where she's a thief, but she's got kind of a heart behind that cynical shell. So I think Anne Hathaway plays that really well. I love her design. I think the way they use her in the movie is great. The banter between her and Batman is great. But now we come to the villains of the story, and it is Bane. Bane was hyped up big time when this movie was being promoted. After the untimely death of Heath Ledger, we all knew that there's no way the Joker was going to play a role in this next movie, which really stung because he was so fantastic in that last movie, and it felt like they were building up to something bigger in this movie. But I completely understand why they felt they needed to shift this movie away from what the Joker was doing, because you can't just replace that performance. It was so good, so iconic. So you really had to bring in a new villain to drive the conflict of this movie, and it's Bane. But it's not really Bane, and this is my biggest problem with the movie, and it's all in the script. It's the way the plot is structured. It's just Batman Begins again. They bring back the League of Shadows, and even though Ra's al Ghul has not returned physically, his daughter, Talia, is a twist villain in this movie. And Talia, played by Marion Cotillard, I think I'm pronouncing that right. She is actually not that bad as a twist villain. I feel like her character has a lot of little nuggets that she gives, hinting us towards the fact that she is Talia al Ghul. And the first time I saw this movie, it did surprise me. I did not see that coming. And even though they had been talking about the League of Shadows and everything, I didn't suspect her to be Talia until it's revealed later on. But on rewatch, there are so many little lines and little bits of dialogue here and there. You can see where the writers left breadcrumbs in her attitude towards the environment, her willingness to do whatever is necessary. Some of her lines feel like she's just regurgitating lines from her father, Ra's al Ghul, but it comes off so naturally that you don't notice unless you know that she has been influenced by Ra's al Ghul. So in execution, I feel like she was done pretty well in this more grounded Batman universe, but they still have the idea of Ra's al Ghul being immortal, but without the Lazarus bit. It's just his offspring carrying on his mission. So I like what they were going for. It just kind of stinks that they had to put this all into what should be a Bane-centered movie, a Nightfall-style breaking of the Bat kind of story. It's a third act. This is when the stakes are at their highest. So it would make sense for a villain like Bane to stroll into Gotham and challenge the Bat to not just the psychological threat that he got with the Joker, but a more physical, tangible threat that he's never gone up against before. Really, if you look at Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, he really hasn't had to go up against a physically imposing threat like Bane or Killer Croc or Solomon Grundy like he has in the comics with these different villains. All of his threats have been psychological or societal in the case of Batman Begins. And here we have Bane, who's not just a physical match for Batman, but also a psychological one. Bane is very smart and calculating in this version. Not like the dumb brute version of Bane that we got in Batman and Robin that really shouldn't count as a Bane portrayal. Here we actually have something that's closer to the comics as far as his cunning, his strategy, outthinking the Batman at every turn, and then of course the big breaking of his back, which of course is in here, and that's really the moment when it sets in that Bane is this unbeatable threat that Batman doesn't have a chance to defeat. And really from the beginning of this movie up until that point, I've really enjoyed what they were doing with Bane. He's been everything that I just said a good Bane should be, this physical and psychological threat. My frustration with it comes more in the second half when we start learning the motivation behind Bane. He's not really someone who's been excommunicated from the League of Shadows, but someone who's actually working in cahoots with the League of Shadows through Talia al Ghul to fulfill Ra's al Ghul's destiny, which was to burn Gotham to the ground, to just completely destroy it so that Western civilization can improve and move on, because nothing good ever comes from Gotham. And I just don't enjoy seeing Bane reduced, where yet again, bringing back the Batman and Robin comparisons, Bane has been reduced from a villain in his own right, his own plan, his own schemes, to a glorified protector or bodyguard, to a female villain whose motivations really do drive the narrative of the story. And yeah, it's weird that that happened twice. Even though this movie is still leagues better than Batman and Robin, I still would have liked to see Bane with his own motivation, his own reason for coming to Gotham to challenge the Batman, burn it to the ground. Maybe it had something to do with Wayne Enterprises or somebody else in Gotham funding the prison that Bane was born and raised in. Having this prison that he was raised in be his headquarters in this movie is a really cool idea. So credit where it's due. I just wish that he had some other reason for coming to Gotham that wasn't just a rehash of Batman Begins. Because ultimately that's what the last third act of this movie feels like. It just feels like Batman Begins again, with different upgrades and different vehicles flying around. Instead of the train, we have these trucks, and instead of the Batmobile, we have this big flying bat thing, which admittedly, cool design, cool upgrade. Again, all the execution of these elements look really good, really impressive. Gotham City has never looked more fully realized than in this movie. It looks fantastic. You see all these characters rioting and hitting the streets. There's a war breaking out by the third act. And it's so well executed that you do get swept up in the emotion and the stakes. And you want to see Gotham survive. You want to see Batman defeat Bane, defeat Talia. This is not a bad movie by any means. It's just a little frustrating as a Batman fan to see Bane reduced to just another member of the League of Shadows. Even though he's got a cool look, he's got a voice that some may see as silly, but there's so many weird voices in this franchise already. At least it's memorable and really fun to impersonate, so I can't really harp on it that much. But we do have to talk about that ending. The last 10 to 15 minutes or so, that's really where the underlying issues bubble up to the surface, where it just does not wrap up well. This is kind of the Bizarro World flip of the ending to Return of the King, because the Return of the King had so many different endings and it kind of goes on for too long, but every ending is a satisfying conclusion. You feel like it was all building to this. It feels earned. Every character vignette that you see just puts a smile on your face. You don't really mind that it goes on for too long because it's so satisfying. Here, there's similar little character vignettes that wrap up everybody's little arc, but as it goes on, it just keeps getting less and less satisfying as it goes. I don't know how this movie achieved that, because early on, there are a few moments that you're like, okay, this feels satisfying. We're wrapping up, we're winding down. You see the funeral of Bruce Wayne with just the few people that knew that he was Batman at the funeral at Wayne Manor. That's nice. The unveiling of the Batman statue at police headquarters, a little on the nose, but it's still not that bad. Fine wrap up for his role with the police throughout the 3 movies. I'd buy that. And then we get Robin. And Robin is when you know, like, okay, maybe Christopher Nolan and David S. Goyer were starting to run out of steam, starting to run out of ideas. Because that scene is just so forced. Robin is his legal name. Now, is that his first name or his last name? Because his name is Jonathan Blake, which is not a name for any Robin in the regular Batman mythos. It's not Dick Grayson, not Jason Todd, not Tim Drake, which it doesn't seem like that was a priority for Christopher Nolan to adapt a specific type of Robin. I just think he wanted to do his own interpretation of what a Robin could look like in this more grounded interpretation. Obviously, you're not going to have a young boy running around in spandex dressed like a traffic light when Batman is this dark and broody character as established in these movies. That just wouldn't work. But having a cop that believes in Batman, that knows his secret identity, help him out in his most dire moments. Yeah, I could see some of the Robin parallels starting to come together, but why would you just name drop Robin? You could have done a million different things. You could have said his legal name was Grayson or something that's not quite on the nose, but still tells us, oh, okay, so this was supposed to be Robin, so we can connect the dots. But just having her spit out the Robin code name to make our nerd ears perk up is just so lazy. I just can't give it a pass. And then we get all the autopilot stuff with Batman's ship. And again, this is where I feel like a lot of people are split, pretty divided on how they feel about this. I, for one, don't really have strong opinions as to whether or not Bruce Wayne survived the explosion with that nuclear bomb. I do feel like the movie should have cut right when Alfred made that face. That would have been the perfect way to end it. Leave it ambiguous. Let people come to their own conclusion. Because showing Christian Bale with Selena Kyle in Florence just living life off the grid, I just feel like raises more questions than answers. And that's not really what you want to have in your definitive concluding chapter of a franchise. How did Batman clear the blast radius when the last time we saw him in the cockpit was 6 seconds before detonation? The fact that he's with Selena Kyle, which I don't not buy into because they did have decent chemistry in this movie and they did share a kiss. But the fact that Selena Kyle has agreed to just leave her life of crime behind to go off the grid, I don't entirely buy that part, because the whole thing that makes their relationship interesting is that she can't give up that life of crime. It's like this toxic trait that she can't leave. So the fact that she agreed to just leave it behind after just a few days of knowing Bruce Wayne, it just feels a little too contrived and a little confused as to where we go from here. Clearly the story with Bruce Wayne is over, except it's not, because he's still alive, when if they really wanted to make it definitive, they would have left him dead, or at least leave it ambiguous as to whether or not he is dead. Or are we going to follow the adventures of Officer Blake, which he's not an officer anymore, he threw his badge away, and now he's picking up the mantle of Batman or Robin, or what is that going to look like? That's kind of confusing. So yeah, by far the worst part of this movie in execution is the ending. Even though I feel like there are a lot of missed opportunities, bits of lazy writing leading up to this ending, like the rehash of League of Shadows, making Bane a secondary villain when he really should have been the primary villain. I'll never understand that decision. But as a whole, this movie, I don't not like it. I thoroughly enjoyed the experience of watching it. It gets your attention, it holds your attention, until maybe the third act, when it does start to lose me every time. I just stop caring all that much because Talia and the League of Shadows just aren't that novel a threat anymore in this universe, especially when you watch all 3 back to back. It just feels like The Dark Knight kind of blew up the established universe. It expanded everything. It created all these new possibilities for what different villains could look like or do in this sandbox of Christopher Nolan's Gotham City. And all that kind of just feels like this weird tangent or detour that, yeah, it was always about the League of Shadows. That's all Christopher Nolan really wanted to explore with this franchise, apparently. It's still incredibly well executed. The cinematography, the directing, the character work, for the most part, aside from Bane and the League of Shadows, is top-notch, what you'd expect from this franchise, from this universe. So it's still a good Batman movie, but because of some of the writing issues and definitely that ending, I can't say it's a great Batman movie, and I really wish we had gotten more of a standalone Bane story. I feel like if this had followed the narrative closer to what Nightfall was in the comics and Bane's motivation for going to see Batman, I feel like we could have gotten something really unique and special out of these characters. But now I turn it over to you guys. What do you think about The Dark Knight Rises? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. As always, I'm Colby. This is Minority Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.